Winston to demand the Māori electorates get scrapped after he himself has run in them and even managed a clean sweep in 1996. It's almost like Martyn Winston is pulling the Māori electorate's ladder up from under him after he's benefited from using them. How very boomer of Martyn Winston. The Bradbury Group. Come for the political insight, stay for the intergenerational insults. And finally, this week, to wrap the trifecta of stupid, New Zealand First rammed through legislation making English the official language of New Zealand because, you know, English is such an endangered species when it comes to languages. According to New Zealand First, English is literally only alive here and on those golden albums they welded to the side of Voyager 1 and 2. This needless waste of parliamentary process was so that Winston can trade in culture war paranoia that the English language, like Christmas and foreskins, is another Anglo-Saxon Christian tradition under attack, all the while the economy is melting down and catastrophic climate change storms hitting us every month. How about less vanity projects and more actual work, eh, guys? In the words of the great warrior poet Mike Hosking, happy days. The political panel all stars up shortly, whānau, but first, this week's 1-on-1 in 10 with the shadow leader of the House and Labour Party spokesperson for housing, infrastructure and public investment, Kieran McAnulty. Kia ora, comrade. Welcome to the show, and thank you for being available to the Fourth Estate. Your democracy is grateful.
No worries, Bomber. How are you, mate?
Good, my friend. Good. Sure. Look, I wanted to start tonight's show with the Salvation Army State of the Nation that shows 43,500 people estimated to be in severe housing deprivation, 400 less transitional housing placements, and allocated funding for housing support cut by $80 million, 156,000 plus kids living in material hardship. Salvation Army food parcel distribution increased 7% to 90,250 parcels last year. Pacific unemployment was 12.3% and Māori unemployment at twice that of the general population. And domestic violence numbers are surging. Those people don't have time for incremental policies. Chippy said yesterday he won't overpromise and that we have to wait until the budget before Labour can present us with your solutions. All fine and dandy, but how much longer do the people the Salvation Army see have to wait before they get social policy that heals, grows and builds their agency rather than denigrates and wounds them?
Well, I suppose the first point is that the Salvation Army are seeing more people now than they were 3 years ago.
Right.
And we're very grateful for the fact that they are releasing the State of the Nation report, because up until now, and admittedly, I didn't know this until I became housing spokesperson, is that the only official measurement of homelessness in this country is the census.
Right.
Which was frankly mind-blowing, because if you were in severe housing hardship, filling out a form is not going to be your first priority. Second of all, the fact that successive governments have been satisfied with having a 5-year gap in data on something so important as homelessness, it just struck me dead. So now that the government's getting rid of the census, we are even more reliant on the likes of the Salvation Army data and their reporting in the State of the Nation. And obviously housing is what I've been focusing on as the spokesperson.
Yes.
I've been utterly appalled at the government's attitude towards what some, like the Wellington City Mission, are saying the highest levels of homelessness they have ever seen.
Wow.
And just completely dismissing the fact that this is happening, but more importantly, dismissing the direct link between the government's policy of essentially shutting people out of emergency housing and this unprecedented rise in homelessness. And essentially, their solution is to bring in move-on orders so the cops can sweep them out of the main street and we can say to tourists, how good are we?
As the spokesperson for housing, you bloody well know that every single organisation working with our vulnerable in the housing sector all told National that their changes to emergency housing rules would manufacture a homelessness crisis, and lo and behold, that has happened. How obscene is it to simply arrest the problem National exacerbated?
Yeah, well, it's ultimately, how the hell are they going to pay a $2,000 fine is the first question. And why are we pretending that just because Queen Street doesn't have homeless in it, that the problem is solved. They're trying to tell us that by announcing 300 housing first places in September, that solves the problem. Helen Robinson from the Auckland City Mission says they need at least 1,000.
Oh.
It's quite a few months since then. They've only filled half of those. They don't care. All they are looking for is solutions to try and get this off the headlines, rather than the fact that they have deliberately done this
Yes.
to reduce spending because they need to fill the hole in Nicola Willis's budget.
Right.
And lo and behold, the amount that they have saved, $1 billion from keeping people on the street, is the exact amount that they've just recently announced that the government has reduced its spending by.
Yeah.
So there's the people that are paying for Nicola Willis's budget, the people that are sleeping on the street.
Chippy talked about affordability in the State of the Nation. Here's what I think affordability should mean to Labor. Free public transport, free dental, 12 months maternity leave, nationalise early childhood education and remove fees for working mums and dads, state-backed third supermarket, nationalise electricity industry with direct investment into renewables, solar panels on every public building, including schools, libraries, RSA, marae, hospitals, state houses. If the left doesn't make meaningful difference to the cost of living pressures working class people face, we lose voters to the culture warmongers, don't we?
Yes, but we also lose voters by promising things that we put ourselves in a position that we can't deliver.
Sure.
And so everything you've just outlined is as valid as many of them are, cost money.
They do.
And we actually won't know what position we are in until we see Nicola Willis's third budget. She's made a hash of the first two.
Yes.
The good money is on her doing the same for the third.
Yep.
We need to know how much money this outfit's going to leave us before we actually make credible promises to the country.
Yes, and that's valid. But the tactic by the right is always to blow out public services, and they fall over, and their solution is, we need to privatise this. I mean, if Labor are to fund the public services at the levels we need them to be funded at, while retooling communities with climate change resilience, it will take more than prioritising National Party spending. It will need new revenue sources. What about a financial transaction tax or a land tax or a recreational marijuana market? They would pull in billions of dollars of revenue. Is Labor open to looking at those ideas?
No, we've been very clear. We're going to campaign on a capital gains tax. And any government that Chris Hipkins leads, that's the only change that we have going to make to our tax system. But let's be honest, look, there are a lot of things that we would love to do, but we have tried as the largest left-wing party in this country on 3 previous occasions to bring in a capital gains tax.
Yes.
We've got to be realistic, right? We've finally had enough time to have a rational argument about why we need one. And it's not just for increased revenue. It's about stabilising the housing market and many other reasons. And people are on board for it. The Tories tried their hardest to scaremonger like they did when Stephen Joyce was running the show.
Yep.
It worked then. It didn't work this time.
Yes.
People have moved on. But I'll tell you now, if we go out and promise any more taxes beyond that, you can kiss the election goodbye. And we've got 3 more years of this mob causing havoc in all sorts of corners of this country. And we simply cannot afford to do that.
Bernard Hickey argues the following: an economy powered for 30 years by leveraged and tax-free house price inflation can't handle the truth that another trebling of prices isn't possible again. That's because interest rates can't fall again by 9 percentage points, household debt can't treble again relative to disposable incomes, and employment growth from a 15% point increase in workforce participation can't be repeated in an ageing population. Is he right? And doesn't that reality require a vision from the left?
Well, I mean, Bernard's been doing a lot of work on this sort of stuff for a long period of time. And he has argued for changes in our tax system for that very reason. A capital gains tax will go a long way to stabilising our housing market. It won't do everything. We're not going to pretend that it's a silver bullet, but it is a gaping hole in our system where many of the countries that we compare ourselves to have one.
Exactly.
And frankly, I think it is quite a reasonable proposition to New Zealanders that, we're going to bring in a capital gains tax. Most of you won't pay it. But equally, none of you will pay to see the GP for the first 3 times.
Right.
And also inject needed revenue into the health system, which Kiwis instinctively know has been underfunded for a long time. And Simeon Brown's not going to fix it. All he's going to do is try and keep the headlines out of the media, which is why he got the job in the first place.
That's right.
So let's be real about this. We need to find a way to fund the health system better. This is a way that people understand and instinctively know, yeah, fair enough, its time has probably come. It makes sense. It's a reasonable proposition to put to the people of New Zealand. The National Party tried to scaremonger about it. It fell flat, even more flat than Chris Luxon, which is saying something. So they just pulled back and left it alone. They don't want to mention it anymore because they know that when they do, people are like, oh, yeah, actually, there's some merit there.
Right, right. What's Labour's economic vision in a world dominated by catastrophic climate change, geopolitical trade tensions, and the hollowing out of public infrastructure to cheap management teams who milk monopoly rentals while the asset deteriorates? What is Labour's economic vision to that?
Well, you mentioned climate change there, and I want to acknowledge the fact that there are communities in our country that have felt the full force of that recently. And I was Minister of Emergency Management for the Auckland floods, the Nelson, Marlborough floods, and Cyclone Gabrielle, the largest weather event we've ever seen.
Yeah.
So I know and I have seen firsthand the impact of severe weather and what can happen when there hasn't been adequate investment in flood protection, but equally important, proper protections from building houses and other buildings on areas that are flood prone. I'm not having a crack at the people that live there. Absolutely not.
No.
People naturally go where they are told by their local council or other authorities where they're allowed to go.
Yeah.
Of course they do. But the thing is, there are areas in this country that we know flood, that we know are prone to severe weather, and we're just doomed to repeat the same mistakes unless we actually bring something in.
Yeah.
Our $6 billion fund to help councils pay for flood protection and other infrastructure was crucial to that.
Yes.
The Tories have scrapped that, and now the answer is, what are we going to do? And this government's answer is capping rates.
Right.
It is exactly the same as move on orders. It is an attempt to try and distract from the core issue, look like they are doing something, sweep the street clean when actually all they're doing is shifting the problem down the road for somebody else to fix.
The infrastructure report highlighted that the 30-30-30 neoliberal debt straitjacket we've self-censored ourselves into is designed to ensure the public never get fully funded services. How on earth can more user pays mythology be the answer when it's the cause of the current malaise? Adopting more user pays to solve our infrastructure problem is like using cancer to cure syphilis. Don't we need new approaches to investment for our broken infrastructure landscape, like sovereign credit, the way the Savage government did?
Well, I'm very fortunate to have experience with neither cancer nor syphilis, so I'm not sure I'm equipped to discuss this in great detail, but I actually think that the Infrastructure Commission have done a really good job here. They have produced a report that has been sorely missing for quite some time.
Yes.
This is exactly the reason why we set the Infrastructure Commission up under the last Labor government, and we've supported this government to expand its mandate, require the plan, have a look at how bad things actually are. And what it's done is confirm that what we've long suspected is that it is not flash.
Yeah.
And we've got to find a way to be able to deal with this. We've got a situation where the Minister of Infrastructure is saying that we have not done this well for a long time. We need to do things better. The same bloke as Minister of Transport is also arguing that NZTA, the largest infrastructure builder under the government, doesn't need to get its projects assessed, and through the processes established by the Infrastructure Commission, there's a massive misalignment here.
Disconnect, right?
That we're keen to fix. Now, we're only proposing this to improve things. We're not picking holes. In my two main portfolios, housing and infrastructure, we are being as constructive as we possibly can because, one, we need more houses, and we're not going to do that if we keep stop-starting. And same can be said for infrastructure. We've got to fix local government. We've got to fix transport. All of these are linked, right? And we've got to stop the situation where when a new government comes in, things get cancelled, either for political reasons or they find out that the last lot have made promises that they simply can't pay for. Does that ring any bells with the roads of national significance?
Oh, yeah.
If we include all government infrastructure expenditure through the Infrastructure Commission, we will get an independent assessment as to its value for money, its viability, and how long it's likely to take. It can be included in the 30-year infrastructure plan, and everyone can have confidence. But until that, we're going to continue making the same mistakes we've made for the last 30 years.
Finally, Kieran, which MMP government could do the most for people this election? A, National Act New Zealand First. B, Labour New Zealand First Green. C, Labour Green Te Pāti Māori. Or D, Labour Green Top.
Well, my preference is Labour.
Oh, hey, look, that's everyone's preference, but we also live in the real world, right?
But look, if we had to have a coalition partner,
yes,
I'd pick the Greens. I guess ultimately it depends on which people you're talking to. If you're talking about the top end of town, then choose the other lot. If you're talking about everyday working New Zealanders, then don't look at them, look at us. And if you give Labour the most votes, then we'll have the most sway in government, and we might make the same mistakes that Luxon made and just give the small parties everything they ask for.
Thank you, comrade. We'll see you again on the show soon. Kia ora.
Thank you. Cheers.
Okay, now to our political panel all-stars. Our first panellist is the union rep for Slytherin House. He makes Machiavelli look like a virgin, and he's the only New Zealand right-winger not on the taxpayers' union payroll, perpetually joining us from a secure, undisclosed location for reasons we can't disclose. New Zealand Herald columnist Matthew Hooton. Kia ora, comrade. Welcome to the show. One word to describe the week, please, sir. He's frozen. What?
It's been a triumph for the rule of law.
Oh, triumph for the rule of law. Oh,
this week, it's been a triumph.
Has it? How?
For the rule of law, we've got a former prince of the United Kingdom being arrested. We've got Lord Mandelson being arrested, and in the United States, Trump over the tariff issue, and is showing that it is continuing its role that was envisaged by the Constitution to maintain the rule of law. And who would have thought, because that Supreme Court has been a patsy for the president for the last year or so.
Fantastic. She's the fresh political voice of Kiwis, sick to death of the calcified tribalism between the two big parties, while promising universal income and no more catcalling. The leader of the Opportunities Party, Qiulae Wong. Kia ora, comrade. Welcome to the show.
Kia ora.
One word to describe the week, please, ma'am.
I was going to say equity.
Yes.
I was at the People's Select Committee report this morning on pay equity, and it was good to hear a very unified voice from across the political spectrum that this legislation was pushed through under urgency with no consultation, undemocratically retrospective. And I think what struck me was that there was a really strong moral argument, but also a very strong economic argument that actually, by not paying these sectors properly, we are just hamstringing ourselves for the future.
Yeah. And finally, he's the mighty Totara, Kauri Rimu Pureri of the Labour Party forest. He's a man who refuses to see the wood for the trees, consultant to the House of Gryffindor, former leader of the Labour Party, David Cunliffe. Kia ora, comrade.
Kia ora.
Welcome to the show.
How are you?
One word to describe the week, please, sir.
Oh, I think hopeful, actually, for some of the same reasons as Ambassador Hooton there, which is we might be starting to see in some places a little bit of pushback rule. I think it's a good point, Matthew. But my God, what a weird world we have been living in. And as Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney said, hey, don't sit around yearning for yesteryear because it ain't coming back. Yeah. And we need to chart a way forward as Kiwis in this rotten new world, knowing that Uncle Sam ain't coming to save us anytime soon.
Right.
And we're on our own. So we better think smart and do something new.
Preach. Brothers and sisters, let's get into tonight's show. Issue 1, how does arresting the homeless help the homeless? Issue 2, Labour's State of the Nation speech, and how does Chippy define affordability? 3 tonight, the state of our brittle, hollowed-out, user-pays infrastructure. Plus, we'll have a final word at the end of the show. Which panelist goes to the mountaintop to see who breaches broadcasting standards this week? My money is on Qiulae. Let's kick things off with issue 1 and national arresting the homeless that their policies manufactured. Matthew, isn't there something very ugly about a Christian as rich as the Prime Minister who has accessed every single subsidy and tax break he can, even personally benefiting from capital gains taxes that he changed. Isn't there something very ill about him criminalising the homeless? What would Jesus do, Matthew? Would Jesus criminalise the homeless?
I think what Jesus would do would be invest in a proper functioning mental health system.
Starting.
But we don't have one of those in New Zealand, and we're too poor a country now because we wasted the money on other things to have a functioning mental health system. The Labour Party put $1.9 billion into the mental health system. No one knows quite what happened to that money or what it did. There's a Minister for Mental Health around the cabinet table now who's full-time on that job, but I'm not sure there's been any particular improvement. So that's what Jesus would do. But also Jesus would know that to have a functioning mental health system, you have to be an advanced, successful economy. So it just doesn't apply to New Zealand.
Follow-up question. The fine is $2,000. Where would a homeless person get $2,000? Or
from the rent they saved.
Or they get 3 months in prison.
Yeah.
And with 43,500 people estimated to be in severe housing deprivation, isn't Chris Luxon incentivising the homeless to get a bed, a roof, and 3 meals a day for 3 months inside prison? Isn't he making prison a better option than living on the street?
I think this new law will be interpreted by the police to a certain extent the way they do the cannabis laws. And they will use it sparingly. And I think it is it's motivated by the Auckland CBD, which is a disaster for a whole lot of reasons, this being one of them. But I don't think the police are going to round up 43,000 homeless people. I think what they'll do is from time to time, as they do with cannabis, they'll say, hey, they'll usually turn a blind eye. And from time to time, when the ordinary police on the beat judge that maybe this is a time to apply this law, they will. But I wouldn't worry about 43,000 people in jail or paying $2,000 fines.
Qiulae, this government has cut outreach projects, cut food bank budgets, cut transitional housing access, and every single community organisation that works with the homeless told the government that their changes to housing emergency access would generate the very tsunami of homelessness that we're seeing now. How immoral is it to hide the consequences of failed social policy by simply arresting the homeless?
I think if I was to speak directly to National, I'd give them an economic argument because they're clearly not listening to the moral one. And I think even their social investment agency would tell them that they're looking at the root cause of these problems, and the root cause of our homelessness is, poverty, lack of jobs, education, health, mental health. We need to invest in those areas to get people off the street. So the numbers don't even stack up. The cost-benefit analysis is not there. If they really want to solve this problem from an economic perspective, this is not the answer.
Follow-up question. The law is incredibly open-ended and purely subjective in the eyes of the police officer. When will this new law get abused first? For protesters or for 14-year-olds? Because under this legislation, they'll be able to take a 14-year-old and say, move on.
Yeah, I mean, and our prisons are already overpopulated with people on remand. That was in the Salvation Army State of the Nation report as well. So, this is not the solution that we need, and New Zealanders, I think, know that we need better solutions to these problems, and we're ready for something a bit bigger thinking than just move on.
David, don't we have an obligation as citizens in our country to be forced to confront the poverty that this government's policies are creating? Shouldn't we see the beggars and the homeless and be confronted by the reality of what this government's policies have actually created? Simply glossing it away. How is that being a good citizen?
This policy is insane. It's immoral, and it doesn't even add up. If someone had $2,000 or $3,000 to pay a fine, they'd probably be paying it in rent, and they wouldn't be homeless. And put them in prison for 3 months, cost of that, close to $50,000 per head. Spend it on a night shelter, for God's sake. Spend it on mental health services. Actually support the people to get on the pathway to recovery.
Follow-up question. The moving on law was proposed via Sunny Kushal's Ministerial Advisory Group for Victims of Retail Crime, and that board was given almost $1 million by Paul Goldsmith. Has arresting beggars been a good use of $971,000, or could we have used that money to house some homeless, or am I being too facetious?
No, you're right on. Go talk to Helen Robinson at the Auckland City Mission. She knows that the problem is far greater than they can deal with, but my God, they're making a great start there. Just resource them to replicate their model and build more satellites. They know how to do it. That would be a really, really good start.
Quick round to all of you. Let's be honest. These new powers will be used to sweep clean the streets 24 hours before cruise loaners dock, so we can hide the shame of our poverty from rich, fat cruise ship tourists. What does that say about egalitarian New Zealand in 2026? Matthew Hooton.
Well, it's not an egalitarian country because, well, poor countries aren't egalitarian. And I think you've outlined perfectly the times that the new laws will be used, which will be in those situations. And that's what desperate countries have to do if they want to have a tourism industry.
Qiulae?
I'd rather see better high-value tourism than cruise liners coming in to fill our streets.
David?
Hey, we've got a lot to do. We better start doing it. It's not rocket science that people end up homeless if they don't have emergency housing. They end up in emergency housing if there's not enough social housing, and they end up in social housing if they can't afford a market rent.
Preach.
So,
Preach.
hey, let's get some decent jobs and let's get the health support that people need so they don't end up. Nobody wants to be sleeping cold on the streets in winter in New Zealand. Let's give them a helping hand up, not criminalise them.
Comrades, we need to move on to issue 2 tonight, and that was the nation speech. And how does Chippy define affordability? Qiulae, cost of living crisis has burnt working classes and middle classes around the world. If you are not providing people with meaningful material change, they vote with their fear and their anger, don't they?
Absolutely, and I think that what we're seeing around the world, we're coming to the end of this political cycle of the last 40 years, and people are looking for something new. And as you say, they're reaching to populism and extremism, and that is creating even more division. So I think we need bold solutions that are realistic and actually going to help people.
Yes.
With all due respect to Labour, I don't think a few free doctors' visits is going to solve the cost of living crisis.
It's not enough, is it?
We've got creaking tax systems, creaking housing systems.
Feels like GST
prices.
off fresh fruit and vegetables, that solution, doesn't it? It's a
Exactly.
little bit underwhelming and incremental. David, more and more Kiwis are not having kids because of the cost of those getting education here, flee overseas to pay off the debt, while working mums and dads pay a fortune for childcare, and the poorest workers spend 25% of their weekly income on transport just to work. If Chippy is focused on affordability, if Labour is focused on affordability, wouldn't he extend maternity leave, nationalise ECE and cut public transport costs?
I think, look, the lesson from the New York mayoral election was have a few simple things that people can reach out and touch and say, yeah, that's going to help my family. Don't make it complicated, but the point is that those down payments need to talk about a way forward. They need to have a plan behind them that people can understand. So if it's free public transport and free childcare, and in Labour's case, free 3 doctors' visits, it's not just in itself, it's a signal that we're bringing back social security so that if you're down on your luck, you get another chance.
Matthew, some critics said Chippy's State of the Nation was boring and that he put the country to sleep. Is the game, which we're seeing now, which Chris can be the most boring to win the tepid centre?
Well, look, it does remind me of 2014. And it's a little known fact that late in 2014, there was a secret ceremony held at National Party headquarters where David Cunliffe was awarded his lifetime honorary National Party membership. And his portrait,
terribly kind of you. Terribly kind of you, Matthew.
It sits alongside, there's Sid Holland, there's Muldoon, there's Folger, there's Key, there's David Cunliffe, and those portraits are lined up there. And I think we're seeing a similar phenomenon. I expect Christopher Luxon will receive his honorary Labour Party membership later in the year after the election, in a similar ceremony. They'll talk about Michael Joseph Savage, David Longy, Helen Clark, Christopher Luxon. And I think Labor's strategy is very similar to what National employed in 2014, and it's just let's keep the focus on the other guy, because every time he opens his mouth, it's bad for National and good for Labor. And so that's why there was nothing at all in the speech. It was the same sort of speech as the one Luxon gave to the same forum, devoid of content overall.
David, you want to jump in?
Look, I just want to say it's fantastic that Matthew's finally found an audience that truly appreciates his magnificence, even if he had to go to outer Mongolia to find it.
That I deny that. That's
Inner Mongolia.
Quick round. On election night, will Labor have the largest party vote share? And will we know who was won on the night, or will we have to wait for the specials? Qiulae.
Well, Opportunity will be well over 5%. So welcome to the new Kingmaker.
Bring it, the new Kingmaker. David, are we going to know on the night, or are we going to have to wait for the specials?
Yes, Labor will be the largest single party.
Yes.
And no, we won't know on the night, because there is a very high probability, unless Q plays her cards right, that in fact Winston will be the Kingmaker.
Right.
And that will take some time as he extracts pain from both major parties.
Oh, yeah.
Well, and the only way to avoid that
is
for
top. I
voting
know.
Opportunity.
It's absolutely true. Matthew, are we going to know on the night, or do we need to wait for the specials? And will Labor have the biggest party?
Look, nothing to add to what David said there. He's an outstanding political pundit and is 100% correct in what he said about what will happen at this election.
Comrades, we need to move on to issue 3 tonight in the state of our brittle, hollowed-out user pays infrastructure. The infrastructure report released last week estimates that New Zealand's infrastructure deficit is somewhere between $100 to $200 billion. David, infrastructure is not a luxury. It is the foundation of economic productivity. The debate over Harbour Bridge tolls is ultimately about whether the state shoulders national growth costs or whether individual commuters are left to carry them alone heading into the 2026 election. How is more user pays a solution to a problem caused by user pays?
Look, it's not, and the Labor Party, for one, has always had a policy that you could only put a toll in if there's a non-toll alternative. Yeah. Otherwise, you end up with a poverty trap. So
yes.
Let's note that one. But the bigger issue is infrastructure's not just concrete. It's not just roads and bridges. In a modern economy, infrastructure is your internet capacity. It's your AI capacity. It is your research and innovation engine. It's your tertiary education services that you can export, like Matthew. And it's about the smart stuff that drives productivity. So can we please have a debate about infrastructure that links it to poverty, that will drive the wages and incomes of tomorrow, so that we don't end up in a dead-end street? And I do have to recognise the platform that Q and her colleagues have come up. They are thinking over the horizon. They are thinking outside the box. And it is refreshing to have some new ideas in the debate.
Isn't it? Follow-up question. The Manage My Health hack fiasco has just been there's another health organisation that's just been hacked this evening. The Viola Wellington water sewage scandal. The perverse influence the trucking industry has over roading policy. There is a sense that hollowed-out public services are making New Zealand worse, not better. Is that fair?
Look, outside of politics, I've had plenty of time to work with the public service, and I have to say, public service failure is alive and well. Sometimes the smarts are just not where they should be. I hate to say it.
Okay.
So governments of the left can't assume that just because it's public sector, it's going to work. And Labor learned that to its cost last time.
Yep.
Promises don't cut it. You have to oversee delivery. Talk about the poo pond in Wellington. I know the council can't comment because of legal proceedings. But what is in that contract with their contractors, and who bears the liability? Surely it's the contractor that built the plant that didn't work. But hey, what would we know? We're only members of the general public.
Do you get the sense that the contract is letting them off the hook?
Well, I think back to Think big, and there were some really stupid contracts written then where the Crown took all the risk. Let's hope Wellington City Council wasn't equally dumb. So if you're going to go into bed for a PPP, you better hire a lawyer at least as smart as the other guys, or you're going to get skinned.
Matthew, your assessment is that New Zealand has to cut almost every public service you make David Seymour look like a socialist. But what if we took on more debt and lifted revenue? Would you be happy then?
Well, we can't really afford to take on more debt because we pay so much more for our debt than most developed countries. And we're paying more for our debt.
No, that's not
about
true,
4.4%. It certainly is true. We pay our 10-year bond yields are about 4.4%. That's 10% higher than what Treasury hope. You look at the UK.
Our sovereign cost of credit is well below market rates, and we're regarded as a very
our
safe
sovereign cost of credit is based on our 10-year bond rate, and our 10-year bond rate is much higher than the United States, than the United Kingdom.
The United States is a reserve currency until Trump wrecks it, so you'd expect that.
Than Germany, than China, than Greece. So there is a risk built into our borrowing profile, which is much higher. So we just pay more money if we borrow than any other.
What about lifting revenue? What about lifting revenue?
So I think if we are going to want to spend more, it has to be done through higher taxes. Now,
Right.
we just heard from a very senior Labour Party person, Kieran McAnulty, a potential leader of the Labour Party, and they don't want to raise taxes. The only
I'm
tax they
doing
want to
my
raise
best.
is
I'm
the
doing my
capital
best.
gains tax, and they want to spend all that on doctors' visits. So, we're trapped.
Follow-up
because we have
question.
become a poorer country.
Follow-up question. Was the bish bashed for Auckland housing intensification, and does National care if they rule Auckland again?
Well, this still seems to be unresolved. The U-turn is not seen as complete as the advocates for the leafy suburbs, and not just the leafy suburbs, all suburbs throughout Auckland. They're saying they're not quite happy with this, and the mayor's saying he's not quite happy. It's not quite certain whether Auckland does get to control its own destiny, or whether politicians and bureaucrats in Wellington will still have an outsized say. So, but look, this is all linked to the fact that we have overspent for far too long. We have considered ourselves to be a wealthy country when we are not. We have put all our money into grand schemes rather than maintenance, which I think was the most important point from the Infrastructure Commission. We just have to accept that we are 5 million people, middle-class people in the scheme of the world, and we're looking after a country the size of the United Kingdom, and no one will lend us the money at reasonable rates, and we just have to cut our cloth.
Qiulae, tell me again how a land tax could raise money for infrastructure and stick it to property boomers at the same time. Can you run it through? Because it just sounds like a beautiful story, and I want to hear more.
Right. So we obviously have a big housing problem in this country. I bought my house at the housing boom, and I don't really want to lose equity in my property.
No.
But my kids might not be able to afford to buy a house. It might be 15 times their income by the time they leave university. So a land tax puts pressure on property owners that are holding property unnecessarily.
Land banking. Yes.
No intention of developing that property. They have to pay an annual tax on that land, and so they're more likely to sell it. Compare that to a capital gains tax, where they'll actually hold on to that property for as long as they can to avoid paying tax. So we stop that it's the disincentive around that kind of behaviour. It also means we raise revenue, and the people that own property are more likely to be wealthy, but we have also combined this with our citizens' income. So we don't want to penalise people who are middle-income owners and own their own home.
Yep.
They should be about net neutral in our tax package. But those who earn a lot of money, own multiple properties, they'll be paying more tax. And they might decide to sell that property and invest it in things that are more productive, like funds that will build infrastructure for New Zealand. Look at Sam Stubbs' Infra Kiwi fund. They might start to put their money into something like that instead of looking to buy a batch or a rental property, or 5-6 rental properties to save for their retirement.
Follow-up question. Is New Zealand doomed to a managed decline when you see infrastructure deficit at anywhere between $100 and $200 billion? I mean, bless Kieran at the beginning there, but if all it is we'll be slightly less cruel than the National Party when running things, I don't know if that's a big enough vision. Are we stuck in a position where we're just going to have to accept ever decreasing returns?
Well, I'm an optimist, so I'm not going to say we're doomed.
Yep.
But we do have to have an honest conversation with ourselves that we can't have Scandinavian level infrastructure on US style taxes.
That's good.
And
That's good.
we
That's a
need
very
to,
good.
you know, we need to look at where we raise our tax revenue from and how we borrow as well, because you know the next generation need more from us than kicking this can down the road again.
Quickly, a quick question to all of you. Quick round. We didn't have it on the sheet, but we just getting more information as we go to air. Matthew, do you think there is a realistic, and I mean a realistic possibility that Trump will actually attack Iran in the next couple of weeks? Are we really going to see that? Your thoughts, please.
Well, I think the key thing with Trump is you never know, and he probably doesn't know, and no one around him knows. The strange thing about this situation is that there are negotiations occurring between the United States and Iran, and at the same time as a military builds up. You don't see that often. And so one way of looking at it is maybe this is just Trump, at this point at least, being performative,
right?
And putting huge pressure on the criminal and evil Iranian regime.
Of course.
Although that could perhaps refer to both sides of the table. At this current situation, we're not the days of Reagan or Clinton or Obama anymore.
No, we're not.
But as those negotiations occur, it could just be pressure, and it may work. Obviously, the United States could destroy Iran should it wish, and the clerics know that. Although I guess they'd be happy they'd go to heaven or whatever. But of course, Trump will have to. If the talks do fail and he doesn't get what he wants, then he'll have to use that military or look weak elsewhere. But look, the guy obviously has ADHD that's been undiagnosed all his life. So, you know, for all we know, the next military action will be on the opposite side of the world.
Canada, probably. David,
who knows?
There is an insane irony to people who know their history, watching America threaten a theocracy that wouldn't have been there if the Americans hadn't done an initial CIA coup to start that off in the first place. Are we really going to see a strike, some military strike against Iran in complete odds with the law and the international order? And if we do, what should New Zealand be doing here? Because it's like a best friend who's out with you at a party and they've had some drugs and they're going crazy psycho. And you're like, what are you doing with a gun? Why do you have a gun? Why is there a gun in this situation? They're our mates. Don't mates go, ooh, let's put the guns down, mate.
Yeah, look, they are our mates. We share many values with the American people, and unfortunately, I don't think those values are currently being reflected by the president and his coterie. So that's an issue. I remain hopeful, like you, that good sense will prevail and the midterms will swing the pendulum back. I think the president's ratings are very low by historical standards. The question is whether the scrum will get screwed, and I think enough people are outraged enough that they will take to the streets to vote, notwithstanding intimidation. What does New Zealand do? That is a question with a capital Q, forgive the pun, which is that, look, the old certainties about if we get in trouble, America's going to come rescue us, they no longer hold true. And we have a long-standing and productive security relationship with the US. Yes. I served there in our embassy in Washington. It's got many good things going for it, but we can no longer rely on it being a stable democracy operating predictably in our region. For God's sake, now they won't let Pacific Islanders into the country. How do you think that's going down in Tonga and even American Samoa, for goodness sake? So what next? We have our dominant trading relationship with China. Look, when you're a flea and there are two elephants head-butting or worse, just keep out of the way and don't get between them would be good advice until this all settles down. Iran, who would know? I'd like to think Matthew is right on that, and Matthew's learned on these things, that it is posturing, that it might bring the Iranian, and I will say too, criminal regime to the table. The trouble is that if it doesn't and a show of force is needed, I understand even Mossad said to Netanyahu, said to Trump, don't hit that button. They have buttons they can hit too.
Qiulae, look, no one is defending the theocracy's terrible killing of their own people, estimated at 7,000 plus. No justification for that. But there seems to be a fear that Trump's perceived success in Venezuela makes him think that he can pull this stuff with a country that has 3 times the size. If there is an attack, let's say there is, the possibility of the regime losing control and going nutty on its own people and causing a bloodbath, which would see millions of refugees flee into Turkey, destabilizing a central country who we have good relationships with. This could spiral horribly out of hand, could it not?
It could. I think going back to that Mark Carney speech that he gave and talking about the middle powers of the world, this is we're moving into a new era, and it's not maybe 2 world powers, it's 3,
right.
And the middle powers need to combine
or
4.
Yeah.
And going back to your analogy, how are we going to stick true to our values as a good friend and
right.
Maybe get some other good friends to the party and help
Put them into a taxi and send them
Yeah.
home. Put the gun down.
Put
Let's
the
go
gun
home. Comrades, we need to wrap the show with a final word. Qiulae, your final word this week, please. Go to the mountaintop.
It's time for New Zealand to have a new kingmaker, I think.
Isn't
with
it
your,
just? Isn't it
news
just?
flashes of the week. It's time for Winston to retire.
Preach. David, your final word this week, please, sir.
Look, I've been thinking about the ageing population. Maybe that's my age. But I've just been looking at some numbers, and the curve is really steep. And when I was a kid, there were 7 taxpayers per retired person. In 10 years' time, there's only going to be 2. How on earth are we going to afford a decent superannuation and healthcare system for the increasing number of older folks, the increasing number who don't own their own home, the increasing acuity of difficult conditions like dementia?
Yeah.
This is adding up to a fiscal crisis and a new social crisis. And the worst thing we could do would be to say, it's fine. It's broken, you're on your own. So can we please have an honest conversation about retirement and an honest conversation about how we support people to live well in their own homes with proper support for longer, because that is the only way we'll make the numbers work.
Great point. Thank you. Matthew, your final word this week, please, sir.
Well, just to pick up on that first, it's funny, those numbers David quoted are absolutely correct. And I remember them because one of my very first consultancy jobs back in 1999 was working with Angela Folks and something called the Super 2000 Task Force to look into retirement savings policy for the Shipley government. And we've known about this problem for decades. And to be fair, the Cullen Clark government did prepare for it, but since 2008, we've decided not to take it seriously and just spend all the money on other things rather than preparing
to be
for this
fair,
problem.
Matthew, we ran on in 2014 and we didn't do too well, but it was an honest attempt.
Okay, well, but what I really want to say is this is a symptom of a bigger problem, the wider problem, and this whole conversation we've had tonight, and Mr. Hipkins' speech about affordability and Luxon talking about cost of living, we're looking at things completely around the wrong way. The fact of the matter is that successful countries are more expensive than failing countries. Montreal, it costs more to live in Montreal than Madagascar or somewhere. London is more expensive than Lima. New York is more expensive than Nairobi. Ulaanbaatar, in a successful country, is more expensive than somewhere like Auckland. Of course, if it's a country on the up, if it's a wealthy country, it's going to cost more. And each time our politicians say they want things to be cheaper, or they want to hand subsidies to people, which will only cause inflation so they can afford to buy things, we are looking at the problem completely around the wrong way. It is what we earn. It is our productivity that is the problem. And in Geneva, a coffee is $10 a cup, but the people in Geneva aren't complaining because they're rich. And, we're just looking at this issue completely around the wrong way. Hopefully on the Bradbury Group, more common sense can be brought to bear on it over the year ahead.
Thank you, comrades. And now to my final word. Brothers and sisters, the criminalising of homelessness in New Zealand marks a profound shift in how poverty is treated. After sweeping changes to emergency housing eligibility and welfare settings, critics argue the government is now punishing the very crisis its own policies deepened. Every single agency who deal with the dispossessed told this government that their redefinition of who was eligible for emergency housing would result in the exact situation we are witnessing now. This is the direct result of cutting public housing, cutting transitional housing, cutting welfare, cutting benefits, cutting mental health services, cutting emergency housing, cutting outreach, and cutting food banks. Shouldn't you and I, as we walk through our cities, be confronted by the appalling poverty this government's policies have generated? This law allows for people to be moved on in public, and it's only a matter of time before cops try it on protesters, because that's what always happens when the police are given powers like this. The government says this will be like the gang patch ban, but it isn't. In the gang patch ban, professional criminals made a logical decision to simply acquiesce to the new market branding realities, which enabled them to camouflage their crime while expanding criminal activity. In this case, desperate people with complex mental health issues will fight in ways that, once provoked, will require heavy-handed arrest tactics by the police, which will inevitably end in injury, extra trauma, or, God forbid, a death. Who have we become for this to be a solution to any of you? People who agree with this decision are the ones who need to see the poverty the most. In solidarity, the revolution continues. Ka pai Aotearoa.
The Bradbury Group, New Zealand's best weekly political argument. The Bradbury Group is an independent podcast through the Rover Network, sponsored by Wātea News. Everything on the show is an opinion and shouldn't be taken seriously enough to attempt defamation action against us. We were joking. We're never serious about anything. And officially, a small weta in Avondale is legally the owner. Good luck finding him. Don't forget to follow, like and comment.